Greetings, everybody. So this session is one of a series on getting LinkedIn. It is aimed at providing you with a sense of how best to use the platform beyond just the business of getting an online CV together and starting to build a network. We'll look at some of the core options you have as a means of trying to just get a little bit more value out of it, because we would probably all say at the Careers Service that it is an incredibly versatile thing, and there are aspersions cast in the direction of LinkedIn. It's been around as long as many social media networks, and its longevity is perhaps surprising. However, I think it is deserved, because the amount that you can pull from it by way of advantage in your networking, advantage in your career searches, is considerable. We're going to get into some of that today. What are we going to cover? So you may be aware that there have been other sessions run in this series looking at the business of building a profile and starting to build a network as well. We're not going to dwell too much on that today. We will just quickly recap what's gone in those previous sessions. We'll show you where to find those sessions as well, so that if you do want to access that information, you've still got the option. Today we are going to be looking at how best to leverage what LinkedIn gives you. We're going to do that in a few different ways. We'll look at the alumni tool in a bit more detail. Those of you who came to the previous sessions will know that it exists at least, and some of the capabilities, but we're going to dig deep on that and try to provide a few different means of how to best use it. We'll look at how to search for groups, and actually just the search function in general on LinkedIn. It has a lot of versatility. It will give you a lot of different results, but it's worth knowing what are the different filters you can apply to that. And before we then look at the job search function, and again, what can be done with it, perhaps ways to work with it, but also work around it. If you've got other ways in which you want to search for work, then we've got other things to suggest, as well as other forthcoming events in our networking and LinkedIn series this month. By way of intro, my name is Ben Carter. I am one of the careers consultants for the Faculty of Science and Engineering. If you're not from that faculty, do not worry. Everybody is welcome here today. But if you are already on LinkedIn, if you have a profile, then feel free to send me a connection request off the back of today's session. I urge you, in the interest of good LinkedIn etiquette, to add a note to it to explain that you are here at today's session. That is just a good habit to get into, and just to remind me as well where you've encountered my profile. It's fair to say I'm not as picky as some people out there on the internet as to whether or not I'll connect with people, particularly if you have the University of Manchester in your education section. However, let's form some good habits today, definitely. With me, my co-host today is Suzanne Krieber. Suzanne, do you want to say hi?
Yeah, hello everybody. So if you came to the LinkedIn session last week, you would have met me and my colleague Vic. So I support the Faculty of Biology, Medicine and Health, but in the time I've been here at the university, I've worked with everybody from humanities students through to engineers. And I'm really, as with Ben, I'm happy to connect with students of the University of Manchester. And as with Ben, I really do urge you to add a message. It's a really good habit to get into, even with people that you know already and might know well, just to add a note when you want to connect with them. Because when you're connecting with people that you don't know, you're miles more likely to get them to engage with you if you do it in a professional, polite kind of way. So please do feel free to connect with me today, but I'll be looking for a note, so don't forget that.
Onwards then. Again, by way of a quick recap, where you may want to get started. If LinkedIn is a new resource for you, then there are things to take a look at, because we thoroughly recommend you maybe review the previous sessions in this series, and having a professional looking profile, having one which reflects well your CV, your current status, that is to say the stage you're at with your degree, the level of experience that you've acquired, the different activities you've been involved in. These should be reflected in your profile, ideally with a good photo and just an ability to give a reader a very quick snapshot of you as a career prospect. On top of that, it's great to start building your network. Now, this is not necessarily an easy thing at the early stages, but what we'd recommend is reach out to your immediate circle, make sure that you are talking to friends, family, classmates, colleagues, careers consultants, academic staff, those who will be happy to hear from you. And as we said just now, it's worth getting into that good habit of adding a note to your connection requests. It's something which can go a long way towards encouraging people to respond to you. We will return to that as we get into the business of connecting with people through the alumni tool, for example, because it always helps when you've got something to explain where you've come across them, like today's session, for example. Now, as a means of exploring this, we wanted to get a quick snapshot of the room today and just see where people feel are up to in terms of, I suppose, their LinkedIn exposure. And to that end, we have a couple of short poll questions. And the first is around, what do you feel is your current level of experience using LinkedIn? And the second is roughly how many connections do you feel you currently have? Fabulous. That's everybody. Thank you very much. I'm going to end the polling there and share the results. I hope everybody can then see roughly the stage that everybody's at here. So in terms of current level of experience, got 44% of the room got an account, but not quite sure what to do with it. That's fine. That's what we're here to do today. Those of you who are brand new, welcome to the LinkedIn experience. Do use today as the jumping off point for whatever else you might wish to do. And those of you who are more confident with it, what I hope is that we're going to introduce a few different quirks to the system, maybe things you've not encountered before, as a way just to optimize your use of the platform. If any of you need, I suppose, a little bit of reassurance that others are in the same boat as you, the fact that a full third of the room feel that they've got fewer than 10 connections, yeah, take comfort from that fact. Everybody starts somewhere with LinkedIn, and becoming a super connector is not necessarily an easy thing, and it's not something many people really get towards. I think most people usually get to being around the sort of 100 to 250 mark, which is our second most populated point on that particular scale. So don't worry if you're not at that stage yet. That will come in time. You can be more active. You can go about it by means of seeking people out, taking, for example, a summer as a means to actively expand your network. However, as we will discover, there are ways in which LinkedIn can slow that down, actually. So we will come back to that. Pressing on, though, in terms of those other resources, the things which have already gone before, those workshops, if they've not already made it to our YouTube channel, will be there very shortly. And if the most recent ones aren't there yet, then you will find previous videos on building a network on LinkedIn. So the Career Service YouTube channel is very well populated, and you will also find written resources for this using the Career Service website. There are some good worksheets there to take you through the process of just acting on different parts of the LinkedIn experience, be that building a network, building your profile for the first time, or just exploring some of the tools there. So we've got a few different formats you can access for how to explore LinkedIn in different ways. So once again, use the bit.ly links on screen, or scan the QR code if you want to access any more, or head to the Career Service website. You will find LinkedIn resources under applications and interviews, just because we consider it that sort of networking aspect, a big part of that process. So under the applications and interviews tab, you'll find all of our LinkedIn stuff. Okay, that's enough for what's gone before. Let's maybe turn our minds to what are you going to be using. One of the first things I'm going to look at is the search function, the general search function on LinkedIn. When you first start exploring on LinkedIn, and you first start putting things into our search box here, it's fair to say it's quite a sprawling system, and it's worth knowing the different ways in which you can start filtering some of the searches that will come through. So I was looking at this the other day, and I thought I'd use it as the example for today's session, because somebody was asking me about the best ways to explore the patent law profession, and it's to say becoming a patent attorney. If you're not familiar with it, patent attorneys are the people who protect inventions. They're the ones who draft patents and defend them in court if necessary. While that is somewhat of a technical profession, if you're from a non-technical degree subject, then this is mirrored by something called being a trademark attorney. And those are the people who protect the intellectual property in the way of images, logos that companies generate. So if that gives you a slightly more easier frame of reference for this. But it's an interesting career area. And I thought I'd use it as a way to explore. And if you just take a term like patent attorney, something that you want to know more about, and put it into LinkedIn, it starts off immediately finding you people, which is not a bad place to start. But you may look at this list and think, okay, how do I, what do I do with that? Here's a bunch of strangers who I may have to approach in order to find out more. So before we start digging into that, into the people here, there are various other ways that you can explore this, and LinkedIn provides you with a bunch of filters for this across the top. Now, one, you could just start looking for jobs if that's the point you feel you're at. Now that's fine, and we'll dig into the job search function a bit more later. What I wanted just to throw in at this point was this filter, additional filter for experience level. Now you might be thinking, if you're in final year or you're looking for graduate roles, that, okay, I should probably look at entry level, for example, as a way to to explore roles which are going to require somebody who's new to the profession, and that would be fine. But when you look at this, it's still, as you scroll down the list of available roles, the various things here do still expect that you've got some level of experience, which then got me to thinking, okay, fine, what if we took that off and filtered for internships instead? Now we start to find trainee roles, which is where I'd expect somebody to enter the profession. So I guess the message here is, do not be too drawn in by any particular tick on this list here. It's worth exploring a few of them just to try and find the level at which you need to search, because internship may not be the thing you were expecting, but it does still provide full-time work opportunities, but it's maybe just going by a slightly different definition according to LinkedIn. So let's back up a bit. That's the first filter we could look at, is once you've searched for a particular term, you could look at jobs associated with it, or indeed other levels of work. The next thing to take a look at, groups. Now, we're going to return to the subject of groups later, because I think that there's a lot you can get from this. But as a filter, this can be very enlightening, because it may start to throw up results you never even knew might have existed. For example, particular regional variations on a given profession or a given interest. And at this point, it's helpful to start looking at such things as, how many members are there in a given group? And do they have anything like entry criteria? Do you have to be a member of a profession in order to join some of these groups? But it's worth knowing from the get-go that as a principal filter, groups is one of the things that LinkedIn will find for you associated with a particular term. Next up, posts. Things that people are posting which have a particular search term in it. This is a little bit more hit and miss, because it just depends a little on how different members of the profession refer to themselves, or a particular interest group. But as I was looking at this earlier, I think this can be a great way to gain additional insight into the way that people see their profession. I was drawn to this first post here by somebody talking around their experience of trying to describe their profession to people, the challenge they had in it being perhaps a little bit impenetrable, not particularly well understood by people outside of their profession. And that in itself, it might not be something which you can immediately share on your network, but if you're looking for a means to understand a profession better, if you want to get a sense of, okay, how do people working in this sector think and feel and refer to it, this can be a good place to start. If you're looking to leverage this as a means of just gathering intelligence for interviews, for example, then I think being able to say such things as, based on the research I've done on LinkedIn, I get that there's a certain perception of this profession, and that maybe people feel it could be better understood. This is a good way to gather your thoughts. Final thought on this is it will break you down further into such things as events and companies and courses. And these will have varying levels of helpfulness for you, just depending on the stage that you are at. Because some of the courses will, of course, be things that you have to pay for, and some of the events may not be the sort of thing that you can attend at this stage in your career. The companies, however, can be very interesting. We'll return to that as we go. So the general search function on LinkedIn is versatile. It can present you with a lot of results. It just depends then how you filter them. For now, though, I want to use the search function for something else. And we've alluded a few times to the alumni tool. For me, I think this is one of the best things on the network. And the best way to find it is to search for a university. We're going to go with Manchester as our starting point. But it's important to note that you don't have to go with your current university when doing this. We're just going to use Manchester because it's a point of reference for everybody. But as we will discover, there are reasons why you might want to turn to a different university's alumni tool. There are ways you can draw a lot of advantage from that. Once you've got to a different, to a particular university's alumni page, to their LinkedIn page, click on alumni here. And this is what you're hoping to get to. What can you do from here? Now, what you're currently seeing on this page is LinkedIn filtering all of their network for people who have the University of Manchester in their education section. They'll have had some form of educational experience here at UM. And whether that's a degree, a postgraduate certificate, doesn't matter. What matters is that you've suddenly been presented with a subset of LinkedIn. It has pulled together a bunch of people with whom you automatically have common ground. And that's a powerful thing, because as we touched upon earlier, one of the core approaches to just to reaching out to people on LinkedIn is to add a note to your connection request to say, this is why I'd like to get in touch. This is what I'd like to discuss with you. Now, for many people, that process can be very daunting. Just the act of adding a note to say why they want to talk to someone can be something which doesn't come naturally. And you're sometimes worried about fabricating a reason. You're worried that you're just coming up with some reason for getting in touch, which may not ring quite true. Well, this process, the business of going through the alumni tool, automatically finds you something to put into that note. It allows you to immediately say, hi, I'm a fellow University of Manchester student, and I found you through the alumni tool. That's it. That is your justification right there. You can then move straight on to whatever else you might want to say to them, because that then you start to pull in your reasoning why. You might want to discuss a particular sector. You might want to ask them questions about the company they work at. We'll dig into some of those different things in just a second. But the core message there is automatic common ground. You've immediately got something to discuss with them. So that's the principal filter that LinkedIn's going to set up here for you. And you've got nearly 250,000 results off of that. Where it gets really interesting is the various tools it then presents you with as a means of exploring this further. And as we scroll down here, you'll notice we've got a number of different filters. And LinkedIn allows you, for this subset of 250,000, to filter them based upon such things as where are they in the world, for whom do they work, roughly what do they do, what sector are they involved in. Now, it's important to note that this is LinkedIn's approximation of what are they involved in. Some of these sectors are quite broad. So you've got engineering, just that one word as a sector, and you've got education, just that one word as a sector. There's obviously a lot that you can read into both of those. So these particular filters you do have to be slightly careful with. The other filters, glorious one here, what did they study? And then the final two are, what are they skilled at? What is most prominent in their skills section of their profile? And how are you connected to them by way of first, second, or third degree connections? So how best to use these glorious tools? Well, for me, I think that some of the most straightforward approaches to this come in the second and the fourth columns. So this one here for who do they work for, and this one for what do they study. And if we start here, I think one of the reasons I point people towards this most often is for a sense of inspiration. Now, if you want to know, for example, okay, what do people do with a maths degree? You could filter for maths. You can start there. And when it applies this filter for you, it then changes all of the other columns that you see here. So the search results that come back are skewed based upon your existing filters. And you can then get a very quick sense of, okay, are some of the cliches that I've heard true? Are some of the employers really so closely tied to the finance industry that as people always make out for maths? Well, you can get a sense of that by looking down this second column now. And within that, yes, we've got a certain amount of maths, we've got a certain amount of professional services, we've got the NHS, we've got actuarial professions there as well, some pharmaceuticals, online retailing. There's a lot to choose from. But if the first thing you're looking for when you're exploring LinkedIn is trying to understand, what do people like me do when they leave the University of Manchester, this is a really good way to explore that. Now, of course, as we look at that, that's still 15,000 people to perhaps have a look through. I should point out, that when you scroll to the bottom of these filters here, you've got the top 20 results in any given filter shown to you here. Now, if you were to scroll down past the bottom, you would actually find all of the results. Those 15,000 results are listed beneath these filters. Now, for data protection purposes, I'm not actually going to filter down and look through people's profiles today because I don't think they'd appreciate it being on a video. However, you could do that. And one of the principal benefits of this is that once you've filtered in enough ways to get a sensible number of people to look through, scroll down and start looking at some of their profiles, because it's not just what appears in this column. This column gives you where are they working now, which is interesting. Don't get me wrong, that's useful data, and it gives you a jumping off point for asking them questions. But that's just the start, because if you were to filter for any one of these companies here and get, let's see, as we scroll down this list, we get down into the sort of the 30s and 40s in terms of the numbers of results. That's an easy number of profiles for you to scroll through and just have a quick glance at their thumbnails. Now from there, you can start opening a few profiles. Here we start to hit some of those limitations that I mentioned earlier, in terms of how LinkedIn may slow you down, because there is an upper limit on how many profiles you can look at in any given month on LinkedIn. I think it's 25. It's not huge. It's important to know that this exists, though, particularly if you want to be intensive about this and really explore, because LinkedIn, up to a certain point, will start flashing you messages saying, it looks like you are a super user. It looks like you ought to be paying for more access to this. So please be somewhat careful with how many profiles you look at in a short space of time. However, if you just want to browse, then you could take their current employer as a starting point, and then look into a few profiles, but look through their work history. Look at their work experience section, because that for me becomes even more fascinating than where they are working right now, because the stages they've been through to get to that point can give you a load more inspiration. And particularly depending on the stage you're at with your degree, you may not be looking for graduate work right now. You may be looking for internships, networking opportunities, insight opportunities, work experience. Look through people's profiles, see what they did at different points during their career. And that once again, I hope will throw up things you didn't think of. It will hopefully throw up names of companies you've never heard of. And well, how else can you find that? Well, as you look down this list, most of these are well-known large employers. If you wanted to get this list down to maybe a more interesting array, then there's other ways in which you could filter. You could, for example, look just for people in a particular local area. That gets us down to 2,500 or so. And then you can maybe start looking for people who are more recent graduates from the university. That gets us down to, wow, still 1,456 results. But from there, at that point, you can maybe start looking for those who are maybe only second-degree connections from you, for example. Those who you have maybe a little bit of extra common ground with. So once you start to get down to a sensible number, then you can start to explore a little bit further with this. So use a subject as your starting point if you wish. A slight caveat to this: to those of you who are studying subjects which are very broad in their application, if you're studying a subject which maybe has multiple different iterations, different ways it can be described, different titles for the degrees which exist for it, and you may be worried about getting search results which don't really reflect your degree as such. Now, we've seen this. I've seen this every time I use this search, use these filters. You will get some odd results occasionally. So I've searched for chemical engineering. Sorry, I've searched for chemistry graduates and got chemical engineering graduates, for example. So it's not perfect. And it can sometimes draw material from people's prior education rather than just their university education. It's not completely without flaws. So when that happens, and you're thinking, okay, how do I best find people useful to me? The ones who perhaps have taken a path similar to me. Well, let's maybe clear all of our filters for the time being. What you might do, for example, is search for, let's take a subject. Let's take biology. And what you might want to do first of all is put on the official filter for this, and then remove your search, your keyword search. One interesting quirk of this is that you can only have one keyword filter on at a time. So I would remove your initial filter at this point and just go with biology as it's defined by LinkedIn. Now from there, you've still got 6,000 odd people to look through. One of the next most interesting ways you can explore is then to use this column to start looking for people who maybe have similar interests in it, to you, who maybe, once you get into looking at things like data analysis, even more specific terms like PCR, for example, particular lab skills. Once you filter for those, you're pretty well assured of finding people who have genuinely taken biology as a degree level subject, because it's unlikely that they would have acquired those skills through some other degree path. So don't forget to use the full range of these filters when you're exploring. When you're trying to get that number, 5,935, down to a reasonable number to look through. So there are different ways you can explore this. How else are you going to explore? So we've looked at degree subject as your principal filter. Next up, just look for a company. If you're in the process of applying somewhere and you're looking to gather intelligence on that company, come to the LinkedIn Alumni tool and see whether that company's name appears when you put it in as a keyword search. And if it does, fantastic. Go see who works there. Maybe have a look to see how recently they started working there, because you can quickly, when you go over somebody's thumbnail, you can see what year they graduated from Manchester. And as we've already discovered, you can filter based upon what years they were at the university. If you just want to look for people who are relatively recent hires, they can maybe give you more up-to-date information. They may be at a more similar point in their career to you, and therefore are more likely to get back to you to offer you their insight. If they've been at the company for years, they may be slightly more senior. They may not keep track of their LinkedIn in quite the same way as those who are just getting started. So do use a company name as a principal filter, but it doesn't have to be the only thing that you do with it. As a final thought on the alumni tool, I'm going to return to the business of you don't have to use Manchesters. And here it starts to get more interesting, because obviously where I started was common ground. The fact that when you approach people using this tool, you can immediately say to them, this is how I happen to find you. This is what we've got in common. That's a great starting point. If you want to explore more widely, though, if you want to know, okay, what do people from other universities do with their degrees? Degrees like yours, for example, you can still go look at those universities' alumni tools. LinkedIn won't stop you doing that. What you lose there is the common ground. Then you really are approaching strangers. And you can still help maybe to justify saying, I found you through the LinkedIn alumni tool. That maybe gives you something to work on, but you are really reaching out to people with whom you may not have any common ground at all. Where it becomes really interesting, though, is if you're considering other courses of study, and you want to find people who have taken that course of study. If you're looking at master's courses, for example, and you want to know which is the best course to take, well, of course, any university that you contact they will tell you, well, ours is the best course to take. Naturally, please bring your money. If you want to get a first-hand opinion, though, get into the LinkedIn alumni tool. Take the title of the master's course that interests you and put it in as a keyword search. And ideally, assuming that the course has been around for at least a couple of years, the search results you'll get back will be graduates from that master's course. And if you wanted to approach them, reach out to them and say, I'm interested in finding out more about the master's you took. If they loved it, they're quite likely to come back to you and explain to you why they loved it. If they hated it, they're still quite likely to come back to you because they will want you to avoid their fate. So use this as a means to explore postgraduate options. I think it's an undersold aspect of the alumni tool. It's a great way just to get some objective opinions on whether different courses are right for you. Okay, I'm going to pause there for a second and just return to where we started, looking at such things as different ways to use this. We've already touched upon some of the aspects that we had on that previous slide, which were things like researching organizations. I think that the alumni tool is a great way to do that. We did, however, mention joining groups as a way to explore as well. And returning to my example before of patent attorneys and groups, There we go. You may have a strong idea about what kind of group you wish to join, in which case, great. What I'd suggest, though, is when you light upon something like this, a list of search results, head into a particular group, and before you hit follow or join, have a look around, because such things as we saw on the previous page, the number of members of a group gives you a good indication of, is there much activity going on here? You don't want to join groups that are just going to be quiet. Now, let's take a look here. As we look at this particular group, for example, you may jump into this thinking, okay, great, I definitely want to see all the activity that goes on here. But if you're worried that things like, the last post on here was 2 years ago, then that does start to speak about the level of activity here. So be slightly cagey around that. What you can do, though, one of the big advantages of joining groups is you can then see all the members of that group. Now, you've maybe got to start digging into this in a little bit more detail, but you can search through the members in different ways. And if you can start to look for people who are, for example, second degree connections to you, you may have an easier time of reaching out to them. If you wanted to, say, connect to their profile, then second degree connections, there's always at least one person that you have as a mutual connection. You can maybe seek that person out to ask for an introduction. What else? There may be other ways that you can explore this by way of what other search results have come up for particular groups. Where else do group members for this look? So you can also reach out to admin members for particular groups as a way to explore. So it's worth exploring groups to the fullest extent rather than just joining one and waiting for things to happen. It's worth seeing how else you can use it to your advantage. If you do join a group that seems to have been quiet for a while, start up a new post. Put something in there to say that you're interested in finding out more, and then see what comes back. It can be a good way to jolt them back into life. Okay, I'm going to cease sharing there and turn over to our chat. I can see that Suzanne, you've been sharing various things as we've gone along. Anything in by way of particular threads that we should follow up on at this point in order to answer questions or just explore different areas?
Okay, there's a few things I just thought I'd bring up. The first thing you mentioned was about how much you can see on LinkedIn for free before it starts asking you to get a paid membership. So everything that Ben and I have shown you today, you can do with a free membership. And I use LinkedIn quite a lot. I will use it to look at profiles when I'm working with students. And I find that even with my level of usage, which I suggest might be heavier than yours, I usually get about 3 weeks into the month, and then it starts to kind of cut back on what I can see. The first thing it does is that it will only show me profiles of people to whom I have a connection. So if I go into Alumni Search after a certain point in the month, I don't see 250,000 people, I see about 30,000. So that's the first thing that it might do. But I would suggest, unless you're actually moonlighting as a recruitment consultant or really doing nothing else but be on LinkedIn, that you shouldn't find that will be too much of an issue. But important really is to make sure that you have a critical mass of connections before you start. Because if you've only got a couple, you're not going to see that many results actually appearing on your searches. I think we often say, don't we, Ben, maybe about 30, 35 to 50 usually allows you to see a good number of profiles. And also connecting with people who already have a lot of connections. You'll have people out there that you know who are super connectors. If you connect with me, for example, or with Ben, immediately we'll supercharge your network because I've got over 1,000 first-degree connections who will become your second-degree connections. So you don't have to have hundreds of connections to get the value, just get the connections you feel comfortable with, but be aware that they grow exponentially depending on who your connections might be. So I think that's something worth saying. You don't have to have a paid account to do everything we've shown you here today. The other thing I wanted to mention as well is when you're looking for companies, because sometimes you put a company name in and you think, well, which one is it? There's 6 companies here. And there's 2 tactics I sometimes suggest. The first one is to go to the actual company's normal web page, because if they are active on LinkedIn, then somewhere on that page will be a link to social media, include a link to their LinkedIn profile. So that's a good way of finding it. The second is to look at that homepage and just have a look at the logo and see what it looks like. And then when you've got a whole list of companies in your LinkedIn search, you can spot it because you can go straight to that logo. So that's another way of finding the company in which you're interested. And the other exciting thing about that is that when you find a company you're interested in and go to their page, it will show you alongside it other companies that people have looked at. Sometimes it's because it's got a similar name, but often it's because it's in the same sector. And this is ace if you're finding really niche companies or small businesses, because if you find one, LinkedIn will show you others in the same area of business. So it's really helpful if you say, well, I'd love to work in a company like that, but who else does that? So lots of, and that's what we try to get across in these sessions, the interconnectedness of LinkedIn. You start with one thing and suddenly it throws its sort of tendrils out there and shows you other related areas you might not have thought about or might not have come across. So those were two things which I wanted to kind of raise at this stage, because I know that we get asked to, I get asked this quite a bit when I'm in guidance with students.
Indeed. There's a question just come in around the upper limit. The figure I came up with there was 25. Does that roughly tie with what you have in mind?
The searches, I don't know, because I think I've looked at more than 25 and a bit. I think it depends whether you're looking at people you're connected to or people that you don't. And because I've got quite a large network, I'm not looking like I'm sort of throwing my net too wide. So again, having that critical mass of connections means you'll see more before it starts to get suspicious that you're, because LinkedIn's used an awful lot for recruitment. That's how they get lots of their revenue. And they want to make sure if you're a recruiter, you're paying for the recruitment account and not getting sneaky looks at people's CVs. So as I said, you know, if you're still at that stage of only having a couple of connections, it's really worth building them.
Just to say that there may be limitations depending on how heavily you use the mobile version of LinkedIn. Well, one very quick way to illustrate that is the fact you won't be able to use the alumni tool, for example. So that it is definitely worth making sure that you explore this using the desktop version wherever possible.
So what I'm going to do now is talk to you about using LinkedIn to find jobs and different strategies you can use to do that. So I'm going to just screen share, and I'm going to share with you our University of Manchester demonstration account, which is that of Sam Routledge's. So what we did is we created Sam's account because we wanted a way to demonstrate to you what a good LinkedIn account might look like. And this is Sam here. So because he's not a real person, we've used a line drawing there as an avatar for him. And what we're going to do is talk to you about how you can use LinkedIn to find jobs. As we said, LinkedIn have this recruiter account, and recruiters can use LinkedIn to find candidates. And certainly I've noticed, and my colleagues have noticed over the last number of years, it's being used increasingly heavily by recruiters for to spot talent. And so I'm going to show you some different ways of using it to find jobs. Now, the first thing I'd say, if you're looking for a job on LinkedIn, is start by looking at your profile, because there's things you can do there to make yourself more visible to recruiters. The first thing is that with LinkedIn is to be visible to recruiters, you need to use it. And that means you don't set up a great profile, they'll never go near it ever again. You need to interact with it on a regular basis, because LinkedIn prioritizes searches for recruiters depending on how active users are. What they don't want is a recruiter to go onto LinkedIn and find a really good candidate to find out that they've not been on LinkedIn for 5 years. So going onto LinkedIn and maybe liking posts in the homepage or updating your profile tags you as an actual active user, which means you're more likely to appear in searches. So that's the first thing to say. The second thing to do is on your profile itself, because again, you can make yourself more visible to recruiters. So this is Sam's profile here. So the first thing I'm going to do is use this option here to say that I'm open to finding a new job. And I can make a few kind of tweaks here and adjustments depending on what I'm interested in looking for. So Sam is looking for jobs in marketing and sales. So I'm going to add a few job titles in here. So I'm going to put in here marketing executive, because executive is a catch-all term often that's used for entry-level jobs in industry. So I'm going to put that on there. I might put on there maybe sales and marketing executive. And what you can do by looking at other people's profiles, people who are in the jobs that you're interested in, is have a look to see how they describe themselves. because that allows you to actually find, to put in keywords there that are relevant to the kind of things that you're interested in. There we go. You can pick the locations you want to work. I think I'm open to remote work because given we're in lockdown, that gives me more options. And also you can say when you're looking to start work. So are you looking for jobs right now, or are you casually browsing? And then you can add that to your profile. And you can also add this little kind of neat little flourish here, which means that when people look at your profile, they can see that you are looking for work. So there we go, Sam Ratledge is now open to work. Now, the second thing you need to do is to think about how you use this text here. So under Sam's name, it says biology student at the University of Manchester. This is called your LinkedIn headline, and it tends to auto-populate depending on your profile. But what you can do is tweak this so it reflects what you're doing now. So Sam at the moment is building a career in sales and marketing. I'm going to make that a little stronger now because Sam is looking to graduate here. So I'm going to put here, looking for internships in sales and marketing. So when somebody looks at Sam's profile now, you can see straight away what he's about and how he's using LinkedIn at the moment. So that's the first thing. Before you look at any jobs, make sure that you look like you're open to jobs, and also make sure your profile looks good as well. So it looks finished and complete. So if someone sees it, they're going to be impressed. So when you've done that, the next thing to do is to explore the different ways that LinkedIn will show you jobs. Now, the first most obvious way is the fact that at the top of the page, you have an option which says jobs, and you have built into LinkedIn a job search facility. Now, LinkedIn works a bit like a vacancy aggregator. So as well as employers advertising jobs actively on LinkedIn, it will search the internet and look for jobs which are organisations who have a profile on the system there. So there's different ways you can use this screen. So you can search for jobs according to the skill or title or company that you're looking for. And secondly, you can look according to zip code. So I'm going to put in here, for example, marketing executive. And then when you put a word in, it goes straight into this second page where you have a lot more filters to use. So that's my first tip, is it's very hard on the first page to make it very specific, but once you go a level in, then you can really go to town. So down the side here, we can see lots of jobs being listed with marketing executives. So you can see that executive is a good word to use for any graduate entry level jobs. So we've got roles here at different businesses that I can go and explore. I can also filter this by when the job is posted, so I can find things which are maybe posted in the last week or maybe in the last day if I'm super keen. I can look at the level of experience, and Ben said a little bit about this earlier. So sometimes it's being a little bit more open to what experience might be required. I'm going to choose internship and maybe entry level because Sam is still at the start of his career. I can look at these options here, and there's also an you can really go to town with the other options here depending on what it is that you're interested in, if you're looking for very specific locations and what have you. And then you have details here about the job. Now, when you go in to apply for a job, in some cases it will allow you to go straight in and apply now for it. In some, you've got something called Easy Apply, where LinkedIn sends, I think I'm right to say, Ben, here, that it's a link to their profile to the company itself. Although there are different easy ways of applying for a job on LinkedIn, what I would probably say as well is that if you're not at all sure about maybe sharing your LinkedIn profile with somebody, is that job is probably advertised somewhere else as well. It might be on their actual web page or whatever. So again, just because a job says easy apply, that's not the only way to apply for that job. So you can see this is one way to find jobs that you might be interested in. It's also a great way to get inspiration if you're thinking, well, what kind of jobs are there for marketing executives and what kind of companies might I actually work in? So you can see quite a few here are with THG, which is the Hook Group, which is a huge online retailer, very heavy recruiter of Manchester students and graduates, and they've got a couple of positions here that they're advertising at the moment. So that's the first place you can look for jobs, and that's actually looking at the job section on LinkedIn. But there are other ways to find jobs on LinkedIn as well. And the other way of doing it is to think, well, where have other Manchester graduates gone to who work in that area? So Ben showed you Alumni Search. So it might be that I'm quite interested in maybe working in a certain work area or looking for a certain job title. I might put that job title into the Alumni Search to see people who've got that job title, to see where they work. And then what I can then do is look for the kind of companies who are there. And then I could even click on that company to see if they're currently advertising at the moment. So to use the Hook Group as an example there, if I put in THG on here, so the Hook Group's profile, I can see there's their business here. Now, when I go into their homepage, I can see that I've got a link here to jobs that I might look at to see what's being advertised at the moment. So there might be others there that I might not have seen. So that's something else to check on there as well. And so there's all sorts of kind of graduate positions have come up there for LinkedIn, for the Hook Group. I'm not on commission, by the way. If you're interested, they're based by Manchester Airport, so very commutable for the city centre if you're looking for roles in the UK. But anyway, so that's one way to find jobs. But also what you can do is go and look at their website as well, because they might, and I think this is important for companies, because although they might be advertising jobs right now, some companies will also have on their website a statement which might say, please look at the jobs you've got below, but we're also always keen to hear from interested individuals who've got skills that match our business. And they'll sometimes encourage you to contact them speculatively. And that's a really important message, because not every job is advertised, and applying for a job that's advertised isn't the only way to find a job. And sometimes what you have to do is reach out to organisations and to industries that interest you to see if they have opportunities. Because sometimes you might just hit the sweet spot where they're recruiting. But also some companies don't advertise widely because they don't have to. A good example of this is probably the environmental sector. If you look for jobs in the environmental sector, you'll see lots of jobs out there which will say we need 3 to 5 years experience, which is great if you've got it, but not if you're just starting. But often those companies will welcome people to approach them speculatively. And it might be that for your first approach to that company, the best tactic is to go straight to that business. So what you might do is go to that company's webpage, because a bit like Alumni Search, when you go to a university webpage, it will show you the alumni there. When you go to a company's webpage, it will show the people who work there. And then from this, what you can do is maybe find people who've got the right job title for what you're interested in. Maybe people who've got the same kind of shared history with you, maybe studying the same kind of degrees you've got. And you can use that to maybe get clues as to who you might approach speculatively. You might find names of recruiters on there, or you might find the name of a graduate who works there, who maybe is in your network, or maybe isn't. You can approach them and maybe say, I've just noticed that you're working at so-and-so business and that you started there after you graduated. I'm very keen on approaching that company. I'm just wondering, who's the best person to approach if I wanted to maybe send my CV in? And then that person will do one of two things. They might not respond to you, in which case you've lost nothing, because if you didn't approach them in the first place, nothing would happen. But they might respond to you and go, I can tell you what you need to do. I found my job, through this webpage, or in our organisation, this person does the recruitment. And reaching out to people and connecting with people is something which distinguishes those graduates who transition smoothly after their degree and those who wobble. It's one of the things you can do as a graduate which really increases your chances of being successful. So really, don't be afraid to reach out to graduates in that kind of way. So job hunting isn't just about looking for jobs that are being advertised, but also using LinkedIn to find companies you're interested in, or people working in the areas that you're interested in, to see where they work, to see if they have any jobs. So again, it's a really helpful way to actually find opportunities by taking that approach. So be courageous and make those direct contacts with people. And the other thing to say as well is that you don't just have to do it on LinkedIn. If you know that someone has a certain job title in a certain company and they're based at a certain office, you might maybe look on the general internet and maybe find an email address for them, or even you can go old school and write to them, send them some snail mail. But again, it's a good way to identify pathways into companies, how people got their first job, where they got their first job, and where you might get your first job. Okay, so I'm just going to go back to our main page again. So, Ben, let me just kind of stop my sharing here. Do you think that's sort of explained clearly enough? A very complicated sort of, it's one of those things that once you get into it, it makes more sense. But when you first look at it, you think, oh, that sounds a little bit crazy, approaching people direct for work. But I think what I love about LinkedIn is that you look at a company's webpage and it tells people who use their goods and services what they do, but you get no feeling for who works there and how they actually do this in terms of people. But what LinkedIn allows you to do is peer through the windows and see who's at the desks, who's working in the office, who's at the factory, and to get a feel for what it might be like to work there. And it gives you a lot more confidence to actually approach companies when you know what they do. And also, if you know what people who work there have on their profile, you know what's put on your CV, what skills they value, and how you can really make yourself stand out when you approach that company for a real job.
Agreed. And I think that we have long since moved past the days when you had to rely on careers fairs as a means of networking. And LinkedIn, I often say that LinkedIn has taken the messy business of meeting people face to face out of networking, because if you're able, when you reach out to people, when you make applications, when you sit interviews, to say how you've used the network, to say that I've got, I've gathered X, Y, Z pieces of information about how you operate based on the discussions I've had on LinkedIn. I've got a better insight into the way your company works as a result of that. Then you have gone further than most other candidates in that situation. So it can be a gold mine.
Yeah, a few things I'd say is if you're going to apply for a job that's advertised on LinkedIn, make sure that you are following that company, because people are either casually on LinkedIn or all over LinkedIn. And if you say, I'm really passionate about your company and I want to apply for you for a job, and you're on LinkedIn and aren't following them, they might question how keen you are. So that's the first thing to do, is to make sure you follow them. Apart from which, when you follow a company on LinkedIn, it populates your home feed with news about that company, and something opportune might turn up on there, which you could mention in the interview. And it might be around something that business is doing, or it might be about something that somebody who works there is engaging with. And that could also be another reason that makes you feel pleased that you're applying for them. So when they say, why do you want to work for us? You can say, well, actually, something I did notice recently was that you're engaging with this initiative, and that's really important to me. It just keeps you up to date in a really, really kind of good kind of way. So following companies is not just for your own information, but consolidating that you are genuinely motivated to work for that company. So that's a really important thing to do if you are applying for jobs on LinkedIn. Follow the companies as well. And also to get an insight into what that career might take you, because another really sneaky interview question is, so where do you see yourself in 5 years' time? And it could be that looking at that company's LinkedIn profile, you can see that people who start working there stay there. And you can see that lots of people within 2 years of working there have been promoted into a senior role. And you could reiterate this and say that I'm looking for a company where I can grow and develop. And looking on LinkedIn, I can see that you're a kind of company where people stay with. And I can see that if I work hard, I've got the real opportunity to actually get to a higher level within 2 years of working for your company. And suddenly you've answered a very difficult interview question in a very cohesive, convincing way. So LinkedIn is not just there to help you to find the job, it will also help you at interview too as well.
If you're interested in finding out more, then we are running actual networking sessions in the next little while, one tomorrow, in fact. where we get graduates from different degree backgrounds back to talk about their careers, where it's taken them, that sort of thing. So if you want to access a Meet the Professionals event, then look for those on Career Connect on our events page. And there is some of our colleagues are running an event next week on using social media in different ways. They'll be talking about things other than LinkedIn as a means of boosting your job search. So please tune in for those should you wish. But I think it's fair to say that we are done here for today. A quick note just to say that if you have worries about how you're going to be perceived in the workplace, if you've got questions around how your sense of self-expression, your background is going to be viewed, and how you deal with that in interview, for example, then these are questions we are very happy to tackle at Careers. So if you want to start looking into this straight away, then you can go to careers.manchester.ac.uk/services/equality. Or you can bring it to us in a careers appointment. That is not a problem. That's it for today. Thank you very much for listening. Please go from this place and put this into action. Thank you to the people who've already reached out to us, who sent their connection requests. Some of those have already been actioned. So if you wish to do that after the session, that is absolutely fine. But please come find us. We'll be very happy to hear from you. And please tune in again for another Get LinkedIn session. But that's it for today. Thanks very much, everybody.